What are the ethics of human genetic engineering? Hello, welcome to Dangerous Policy, a channel aimed at intelligent people wanting to discuss important issues facing life and society. My name is Crispin, and today I want to go over the most under-discussed area of human advancement, which is in the ability to modify and alter our own DNA code. In 2018, a Chinese doctor, Dr. He, announced to the world that for the first time, he had modified live human embryos that resulted in births to remove certain parts of the DNA sequence to make them more resilient to HIV infection. Now, this was a very strange time in the scientific world because no one was sure whether he should be treated as a hero or a villain, including in China itself. In Weibo, the social media platform, there was a raging debate. On the one hand, Dr. He was a pathfinding researcher breaking the new boundaries of human medicine. And on the other side, he was this, mad scientist, Frankenstein monster creator going rogue from outside the ethics of the peers and platform. Well, ultimately, Chinese government settled on the latter. Dr. He was dismissed, prosecuted, and sentenced to 3 years in prison. But why exactly did this happen? My opinion, is that the Chinese government were concerned about opening the floodgates to open competition in this area, i.e. they know perfectly well that there is similar research in the United States, France, UK, Australia, around the world, and that they didn't want to have an open race to who could modify people fast enough so that they can create a new kind of superhuman. And thus, this doesn't stop this research from happening at all. It just means that it's pushed to the shadows, to the margins where it's not openly discussed, including even Dr. He's research itself. His breakthrough built upon work that had been going on in the United States, where theoretically it was possible to modify DNA to make it more resilient to HIV. Dr. He simply put that into practice. So we are in this space right now. And the technology involved is similar to my own name in terms of its acronym, but it actually stands for Clustered Regularly Interspaced Palindromic Repeats, or CRISPR for short. And what that does is essentially hack the human genome or certain parts of the DNA sequence, either removing it or replacing it, in a somewhat imperfect way. And certainly in the case of the two girls that were born as a consequence of Dr. He's research, there is a risk that they will be marginalized and discriminated against throughout their lives because of their human modification. Certain DNA has been removed, and further tests on them have shown that, in addition to the targeted DNA, there's been some other DNA modifications as well. And we don't even know whether or not the DNA removed is only going to be impacting HIV resilience, or does it serve some other critical function, such as with the immune system in other ways? We just don't know, nor do we know the impact that this will have on these girls' children and offspring down the generations to come. As a consequence, there is likely to be fear and discrimination against these girls throughout their lives. This feeds very much into the kind of X-Men comics where, of course, the X-Men have mutations that has resulted in superpowers, and yet there is a society of normies out there that fear and loathes them and seeks to marginalize and oppress them through various means. It's an interesting exploration in human difference and exceptional ability. But then we contrast that with the movie Gattaca, which is an incredible story set in the near future, in which there are now two classes of society where all children are expected to go through some kind of gene screening and modification. A lot of this is very simple, like removing the risk of certain inherited diseases, Huntington's disease, anemia, preventing age-related illnesses like Alzheimer's, coronary heart disease, various forms of cancer and the like. But not only that, accentuating those characteristics that are highly predictive of long-term life success, such as intelligence, height, good looks, and the like. One would imagine that it's going to take us a long time to get to the point where, the normies, the natural births, if you like, are the exception rather than the rule. For a long time to come, such technologies are likely to be held by the remit of the exceptionally wealthy, in part because of the technology itself being expensive, although the costs have been coming down dramatically, but more so to do with the legal frameworks and restrictions of various governments around the world, such as what we saw with China. Because what will happen is that these super wealthy individuals can afford to fund research and development and therapeutics in this area in jurisdictions that have, let's say, dubious regulatory control, and allow them to have designer babies. And we are seeing this with people wanting clones of themselves, and of course, people seeking offspring that potentially could accentuate all of these so-called positive characteristics. The risk, the human risk in this, of course, is accentuating the disparities that already exist by entrenching human advantage. I mean, one of the things that we debate in our culture is it nature or nurture, i.e., is long-term life success a predictor of your natural things that we can't really change and do anything about, such as, your physical height, or is it a social construct of intersectional power oppressions where there are oppressors and victims and people's experience is a product of their collective identities and characteristics? Well, one of those is right, which is the former, but if we had the technology and ability to alter particular biology, and that biological advantage was only accessible to the exceptionally rich, then we may well be entrenching a class society in which there is not an acceptable level of social mobility, and people who are naturally born and never able to compete adequately with those that have been genetically modified, except in exceptional cases where we have your natural human prodigies. This is a real problem, and I don't think there's a way of winding back the clock. In short, is it better to make it accessible to all people by legalizing it across the world, or restrict it only to the exceptionally wealthy who want to give their offspring the best possible chance of life and have the resources and capacities to go around the legal frameworks of their own societies in order to realize that outcome, noting that we may never know that this has occurred. Rich people just start having really, really good-looking, successful children. We don't notice anything untoward because wealth going down from parents to children is kind of the norm. And yet we see this divide over time just in terms of increasing inequality, unable to attribute that to modified genetic advantages. But then if we make it accessible to all people, then we have the Gattaca Result, i.e., as a prospective parent, you're placed at enormous pressure to alter your children's characteristics beyond just screening for genetic illnesses. You remove them from caffeine addiction, reduce their bipolar disorder risks, all of that sort of stuff, as well as accentuating their intelligence and height. Because if you don't do that, and everybody else is, then you're essentially guaranteeing that your child will be left behind. This also speaks to an issue that's happening right now in our society, even removing the concerns about genetic modification, which is that we already have an increasingly acute divide in terms of resource control based on natural human characteristics. For example, as Jordan Peterson rightly observes, The IQ tests to get into the US military have a cutoff of anyone below an IQ of 86 is not permitted in the military because it is believed that they can't perform any function that isn't fundamentally counterproductive. That is 10% of the US population that is effectively excluded, not just from the US military, but from basically any productive function in American life today, where we now live in a sophisticated society where the means of production are controlled primarily based on one's human intellect and able to scale their industry. So programmers, technologists, futurists, and the like. And also we shouldn't underestimate, in terms of the CRISPR technologies, the advancements that are taking place through biotechnology, private companies, and private venture capital investment. If we think of what Elon Musk is doing in the private arena, not only sending things to Mars, but also implanting chips into brains and modifying human capacities that way, you can see this happening in gene and editing technologies as well. The difference is we can see a rocket going to Mars and we know about chips being implanted into people's brains. We may never know the extent of bioengineering technologies being implemented to modify the offspring of very wealthy people. This could be happening right now, and we just are not fully aware of it. And then there is the geopolitical risk as well. We have a intergenerational struggle between the United States and China, and part of that struggle is a product of Samuel Huntington's Clash of Civilizations, i.e., the Chinese see the Han people as a civilizational power, that China is not just a nation state of borders, but comprises a people born of the Yangtze cradle, one of the great cradles of all civilizations. And thus, it is highly improbable that the Chinese government would allow the Han civilization to fall behind if we saw, a widespread use of genetic modification elsewhere. In short, along with artificial intelligence and along with various forms of missile technology, cyber technology, space technology, there is also a potential for an arms race in human genetic modification, some for good and some potentially very, very tragic. You could even turn a lot of these things potentially into various weapons. So we're at this frontier right now. We haven't really grappled with it. There is a general sense that of fear that if we allow this Pandora's box to open, then we will be overtaken by a kind of a new eugenics philosophy. And we have certainly seen where that took us in the 20th century. And I think one of the problems, one of the negative lessons we've learned from that is that it means that as technology overtakes us, and we are heading in this direction anyway, there's a reluctance to engage in a proper debate because a strong narrative is taking hold that, we shouldn't go there. Well, maybe we shouldn't go there. But the fact is that this Pandora box isn't sealed. A lot of this is happening right now, as evidenced by what happened in 2018. Very likely this is happening in the shadows in other ways. So we should have more open and frank discussions about, okay, if we are going to progress with technologies that can modify the human genome, what is the best way in which we can ensure we accentuate the benefits? And those benefits are immense. I mean, imagine eradicating Huntington's disease, Alzheimer's. There are so many possible benefits from that without falling prey to the very obvious negatives. Eugenics is one of those areas in which not only do we have the experience of the 20th century, but we also happen to know that it works. Richard Dawkins got into trouble for saying this a few years ago, but it's a fact. I mean, we have engaged in eugenics in all kinds of ways, in crops, in foods, in various forms of agriculture, in cattle, in domesticated animals. All it means is taking certain characteristics and breeding for those characteristics. For example, if we only allowed the world's tallest people to breed and nobody else had children, then within a few generations, we would all be 10, 13, 15 foot tall because we would just be breeding, we'd take the tallest people breed for 100 million of those, and then take the top 1%, breed all of those, and again, do that for a few generations, and we have completely transformed the human, body structure, right? We can do that for intellect. We could do that for running speed. So these things could happen. There's nothing magical about this. We all have advantages and disadvantages. It's just a matter of what the society values. And this is one of the obviously the many of the obvious traumatic things that happened with the Holocaust is that Jews were not valued for all of their natural advantages, of which there are many, not least of which is intelligence, and yet they didn't fit into the Germany's view of the master race, and therefore not only were they marginalized and discriminated against, but systematically exterminated. And that is a potential risk in the future that we absolutely have to think about avoiding, because if we do end up modifying our own offspring, we've already kind of circumvented natural selection in many ways. For example, premature babies that would never have survived in previous generations through the wonders of medical technology are now surviving. We are dramatically reducing infant mortality, and the biological evolutionary implications of that are quite significant. It is not at all surprising to me that we might seek to eliminate some of the genetic defects that come with that through DNA modification. For example, let's say we identify that a child will be born with Down syndrome. Well, what if we edit that so as that they don't have that anymore? Now, there are whole kinds of ethical questions around that. Should we be doing that? But also the ability to redress certain genetic defects that we have in our society can easily jump over to all normal characteristics that aren't exceptional will be considered defects and thus will also be eliminated. This is a very dangerous path, and yet we are not having the open discussion about this that we really should be. So this is just sort of an opening gambit to say, look, this technology is happening right now. It is probable. There's no evidence. I don't have any evidence to present to you, but it is probable in my mind that it's not just these two girls, but there are many other babies that are being born with certain genetic modifications, happening in secret at the hands of very wealthy people. The extent, the breadth of that would be a matter for debate, but certainly, the elimination of genetic defects would be the top of that list. That might be fine, but also, where does this all take us? Give us your thoughts below on this. Have you considered the implications of human DNA modification? There is, as I say, nothing magical about the human species in this. We've already genetically modified all kinds of various flora and fauna for various characteristics. What should be the limits of this technology? Is it possible to limit this technology? And if it's not, what is the appropriate ethical framework that should serve as the fundamental basis of a globalized legal code? Or will it just be open slather that the various countries will be competing at a geopolitical level and will never concede to a kind of a treaty that might limit the potential of their own people? That's an open question. I would love to hear your thoughts on all of that. Please leave a like if you found value in this discussion. Subscribe if you haven't already, because these are the kinds of things we like to talk about. And I will see you in the next video. Thank you.